So in this video, we're going to look at the costs of inflation and why it's important for the central bank not to let the inflation level get out of hand, because it makes it harder to solve the problem afterwards. Let's take a look. So for the cost of inflation, there's two types of costs. There's the cost of inflation that happen for any level, and the greater the level, the greater the cost. And there is the cost of letting inflation get out of hand. Let's start with the first one. So the inflation costs that we often talk about are menu costs or shoe leather costs. Menu costs is this idea that if you have 2% inflation, or it could be higher, every so often as a business, you have to adjust the prices of your products because everything is more expensive. So if you're operating a restaurant, that's where the idea of menu costs happens, is that you'll have to update your menu. So you're going to have to reprint menus. It's going to be costly. If you're running a Home Depot and you're selling a lot of tools, equipment, and everything else, well, you'll have to adjust the prices of all the products. So these days, with it being computerized, could be a little bit easier, but in the past was a lot of time spent changing all the stickers, changing all the labels, to changing the prices of all of these goods. When it's 2%, you might not have to go through these process every year. You'll do it every so many years. But if this inflation level was like 10%, you'd have to go through this process more often. So the process always exists, whether it's 2 or 10%. It's just more common or happens more rapidly and more frequently if the inflation rate is higher. Shoe leather costs is this concept that's based on old shoes having leather under them, and the more you have to walk around to go to the bank and come back, you use some of that shoe leather. You're wearing your shoes. And that's based on the idea that if inflation rates are high, you're going to keep the least amount of money as possible as cash or cash equivalent. You're going to try to put it into these financial instruments that are sheltered from inflation, that go up in value with inflation, such as stocks or other financial instruments of that nature. And based on that, every time that you receive money from your employer, you're going to bring it to the bank to try to safeguard that money. And later on, when you need to go get groceries or other things, you're going to have to go get money out. The greater the inflation rate, the more you're going to put all of your money into these sheltered accounts, which means that every little transaction you're going to have to go get money out. So it leads to a lot of transaction costs. If inflation rates are low, well, then you could keep all of the amount of money that you don't think you're going to spend soon in a sheltered account, and then the rest easily accessible so that you don't have to go through so many transactions. So those are the two main things that happen with any inflation level. It's just the greater the level, the greater the cost. Then the other one is letting inflation get out of hand. And this is something that we see towards the end of the textbook in Macroeconomics, managing inflation expectations. And the idea here is that if inflation target is 2% and we let the inflation level go up to 8%, it can lead to lasting problems, because as inflation levels go up, people start embedding those expectations, and then based on that, they're going to ask for salary increases and whatnot. And then all of those expectations that lead to salary increases will lead to increases in costs, which will then be passed on to other consumers of those products, whatever those products are or services, which will lead to more and more inflation. And it's going to make it harder to bring inflation down to 2%. So often in these situations, you'll hear central bankers talking about either this higher inflation being transitory, or that they'll be kind of like entrenched. Transitory is just they're expecting a short spike, and then we're going to go back to our initial and eventual kind of like 2% target. And entrenched is this problem that's going to take a much longer time to bring it back down. And although you could think it's transitory because it's a short-term increase in the cost of something, there's always going to be some level of entrenchment in the sense that if for some reason, I don't know, half of the forest burns down and the price of wood goes up, therefore building houses go up and cost of living goes up. Well, we could think that's a one-time event. Everything's going to be higher, more expensive. People will be adjusted to it, and it's going to stop there. But the problem is that often with these higher costs, some people will try to be paid more, and they're going to start asking for more money. So although your massage therapist may not be affected by the cost of wood directly, like it's not the cost of the electricity to heat her room or her rent or her oils or whatever it may be, hasn't really impacted her, so she has no reason to really pass on that cost, but her cost of living may have gone up because the house that she wanted to buy is going to be more expensive, so that person may decide to raise their prices. So this is something that we commonly see, that a few industries, a few sectors are mainly impacted by this inflation, but other industries decide to also increase their price. And it's not just because they're trying to join this bandwagon and to make more money. It's just that they're having to pay more for these certain things. So it might as well increase the cost of whatever they're providing. So there's part of that. And then there's this idea that if you let inflation go up, like I said, as these people face higher costs and prices are higher, if we expect inflation to still be 8% next year and you're going through your collective agreement negotiation, you're going to, instead of ask for the next 3 years, like 2% increases in your wages for different salary levels, like I could do at the university, it would be like, well, we've seen 8%. Can we really be sure we'll go back to 2%? Let's ask for 8% for the next 3 years. Well, as you start doing that, it means that my cost has gone up, and other industries that are unionized or negotiating higher wages are all asking higher wages. So that means that all of those products and services are now more costly, and it makes it harder to solve that inflation problem. So then afterwards, if the central bank is really key at wanting to reducing inflation, they're going to have to make us go through a little period of hurt to go through that inflation problem. So if we expect 8% inflation, and therefore it's going to shift the aggregate supply curve to the left through to this increase in production costs, well, typically the central bank would then kind of accommodate this policy through monetary validation. They're going to validate these expectations by increasing the money supply, and it's going to lead to 8% inflation. If, on the other hand, they don't want this to happen, they have to start kind of cutting back on this. And as they cut back, we're going to go through a period of stagflation because we're going to have less production happen as the economy is no longer stimulated as much, and as we have higher costs due to these workers being paid more and less production. And it's as people understand that the central bank will no longer intervene, that they're going to start adjusting their wages or stop adjusting them so highly that it will eventually come back to that 2% target. But for this, it's very, very critical that people trust the central bank that's in charge and believe that they're serious in saying we want to go back to 2% inflation regardless of if we go into a recession or not. So that's why in some of these instances where we have inflation problems, we talk about going into this small, soft recession before getting back to full employment with inflation levels that are normal. So it's just very important to understand that there is certain costs of inflation that happen regardless of the inflation level. So if it was just based on those costs, you could think, well, going from 2% to 8% from one year to the next, there'll be a few more menus being changed. There's going to be a few more transaction costs being done. That would not be a big deal because that would be like a transitory, short-lived extra cost. But the problem with letting inflation get out of hand is this whole transition process of trying to bring inflation expectations back down to the desired objective, and that resolves in a reduction in production afterwards. So there's these different concepts such as sacrifice ratio, the amount of GDP we have to sacrifice to reduce inflation. There's these different calculations, but just keep in mind that in the process of getting inflation levels, expectations back down, it's a very costly process. And for that reason, central banks typically want to be very strong and very focused on that 2% mandate. That's their main mandate for that reason. So hopefully that clarifies the different inflation costs, the ones that are kind of short-lived regardless of the inflation level. And the second one here is based on getting expectations out of that desired level. If you keep inflation levels at 2%, you never have to go through this process of trying to reduce people's expectations. So that actual cost does not appear. It only appears when inflation gets out of hand. So hope you understand. Have a good day. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing or joining my class where I guide you to apply and expand on the information found in these videos to real-life examples. Have a good day.